welcome to Book World: The Great Escape. I'm author CJ Peterson, and let's see if I can get this right. Co-host author Michael Scott Clifton, and today we have a special guest, author Jeffrey Lee, first-time author with his fantasy book. Welcome, Jeffrey.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Awesome. We'll start with Mike before we jump into Jeffrey and fantasy. How was your week?
Well, I've been a little under the weather. I have some sort of cold or whatever, but yeah, we've had a lot of rain, haven't been able to get out and do much. And as we were talking before the broadcast started, I do have a new computer and a new printer. So hopefully you'll see me again next week and it actually works and I've got everything running right.
We'll get you working, I promise you.
So hope this isn't the last you see of me for a while. I hope that next week everything is still running like normal, but I can't make any promises. So
if I have to drive, I will come drive and get you online. Trust me, you will be fine.
So that's my highlight. I got a new computer and a new printer, and they're not yet installed. So we'll see.
What do you have coming up next?
Well, I don't really have anything until April. Most of my book events start in April, and then they run. The Comic Cons I go to pretty much start in August in the fall, and do have Dalton Days in Longview, April 1st, and the Longview Art Walk on the 6th. And we will be going to the Boys State Basketball Tournament. I've been doing this since '89, and that's the second weekend in March. So we've got that planned. I always go with some of my buddies, and COVID sort of broke that off several years ago, but we've restarted that back up again. So anyway, that's what we've. Oh, I take that back. And thank you, CJ, because I will be on the Meet the Author podcast.
Oh, nice.
On Wednesday, March the 1st.
Awesome.
And thank you for putting me onto that. I really appreciate that.
Very
so
great.
I will, and that's at 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock.
Yay! Well, my week is very hectic. Anybody who's seen my social media is like, where is this chick going? She's got like 20 things going on. I'm currently, the Sands of Time trilogy is going through a Lone Star Literary Life book blog tour. It's a 10-stop tour. And so it started yesterday. So there are 2 currently out. There'll be reviews. There'll be notable quotables. There'll be, there's book trailer on there. There's a giveaway, which is the most important thing, where 2 people are going to be getting a full Kindle version of the Sands of Time trilogy, which currently the Kindles are 99 cents. So if you haven't gotten them, make sure to get them. Let's see what else we have. I had Magic Making Mischief this morning. We talked about our Carnival cruise, which was last in January. Super fun. Make sure to check it out because there are some tips and tricks regarding cruises on there as well. And a really cool thing called Cruising Ducks. Don't know what it is? Find out. Also, we have Book World today with author Jeffrey Lee. And then tonight I'm on Voice of Indie podcast at 7 o'clock Central Time. Make sure to check out the various social medias for the links. It is audio only, but you can actually call in with questions live as well as comments. You can either call in, there's a phone number, or you can also tweet with the hashtag Fresh Ink Group. And you can ask questions during that time frame of 7 to 8 Central Time. And then tomorrow at 1, tomorrow at 1, I will be on The Wise Ones with Dr. Jacqueline Kerback and Red O'Loughlin. So that'll be 1 o'clock on USA Global TV. So
wow,
just a little bit going on,
Just a little bit, yeah.
The book blog tour lasts until the 16th. And then in March, we have Comic Conroe, which next week on Magic Making Mischief, we're going to be talking to Scott Smith, who owns Comic Conroe. So you can get kind of the inside scoop.
And your blog tour is on Lone Star Literary Life, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So that's what we have going on. So Mr. Jeffrey Lee, welcome to the world of authorhood. Welcome to, congratulations on your first release.
Thank you
Tell
so
us
much.
a little bit about you, a little bit about your genre.
A little bit about me. I've been writing since I was in middle school, probably for the past. I'm 28 now, so probably the past, I don't know, 14, 15 years I've been writing. Been wanting to tell stories, and I was very lucky last, or not last year, but the year before, to get signed with the publisher that I'm with now, and it's been a wild ride, but it's been a dream come true, and I'm loving every minute of it. I'm very excited about it.
Who's your
Um,
publisher?
who's my publisher?
Mhm.
Global Book Publishing.
Awesome.
Yeah, they've been wonderful. They're absolutely amazing, and I recommend them to anyone who has the opportunity to work with them if they can. They've been absolutely incredible. Um, my primary genre is for the books I'm putting out right now is fantasy, but I'm a multi-genre author as well. I have science fiction stuff in the works too, and I hope to do some mystery down the road at some point as well.
Mhm.
I have a lot of stuff I want to do, but right now I'm focusing on fantasy with the books I'm putting out. And fantasy is it's probably one of the broadest genres around. You can cover. There's not a whole lot you can't do with fantasy. It's kind of the whole point of it. It's you can. Um, it's a lot of. I think a lot of people tend to associate fantasy with like a medieval type setting, like
Mhm.
Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, that type of stuff.
Mhm.
Which that definitely is fantasy, but there are a lot more types of fantasy than that as well. There's contemporary fantasy. There's magical realism. There's modern fantasy. There's all kinds of stuff, and there's fantasy and science fiction also can kind of walk that fine line of blending together. Um, my book is, I would describe it as more modern fantasy. It's not
Mhm.
medieval, but it's not set on Earth, and that's so it's not like I wouldn't call it contemporary fantasy, but it's yeah, I would definitely describe it as modern fantasy. But fantasy, I think one of the biggest things that's associated with it is like some type of magic in some way, shape, or form,
Mhm.
which I have that in mind. And um, yeah, I think fantasy, it can. It's There's not a lot you can't pin down as fantasy as long as it contains something that can't happen in the real world, or is fantastic or has fantastical elements to it. Um,
So,
yeah,
what would you actually? You kind of said um, realism fantasy is what kind of you would categorize yours as.
I would categorize mine as modern fantasy. I think what I mentioned was magical realism, which is very similar to what you would describe as contemporary um,
Mhm.
fantasy, like something that has like a modern type of setting, but
Mhm.
with magic or
Right,
monsters or
right.
deities.
I describe uh, magical realism or modern fantasy much like the Indiana Jones trilogy movies, where you have contemporary characters in a contemporary setting with a magical twist or a magical aspect to the story.
Yes,
Like
I
Harry
would definitely
Potter
agree with
is
that.
Harry Potter, Percy Jackson. Those are great examples of it.
Yes, absolutely.
Mhm.
I'm big fans
So,
of all three of those.
what is the title of your book, and what's the basic gist of your book?
The title of my book is Empire of Strings: The Space Between Souls. It's part of the what will be the Empire of Strings series, um, and it's the basic premise of it is that in this world there are people called tracers who can look into the souls and minds and memories of other people around them, and they're able to trace a memory or an image from that person's soul or memories. And with their abilities, they can then project that image in front of them for everyone to see if they so desire.
Wow.
Um, and it the story kind of revolves around all the ups and downs that come with some people having that ability and some people not having that ability,
Hmm.
and all of the consequences that can come from that, and um, but also the amazing things that can come from that as well. Being able to um, connect with someone directly into their soul. It's it's very complicated. There's a lot of people in that world are hesitant to be involved with the tracers who can do that for all those reasons. And There are some tracers in that world that use those abilities for malevolent purposes, and that's kind of where the story gets its drive from. There's a group that's using their abilities to terrorize the city that the story takes place in, and the main character, just as she's about to realize her dreams of becoming an artist, a tragedy strikes with this group, essentially invading her city, and then they have to deal with that. And that's essentially what the story is about.
Now,
So
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, how many books do you project will be in the series?
There for Empire of Strings, there will be at least 2, probably 3, but it's going to be part of what I envision to be a larger shared universe that I have many other books planned for. I think at total count, the last time I put it all together of what I want to do, it was like 15 or 16 in the whole shared universe. Empire of Strings will probably only have 2 or 3, but it's part of a larger story.
Now, you mentioned
like
that it's not Earth. Where is it?
It takes place on a planet called Serrano that is very Earth-like, but it's got a few things that separate it. Gravity works a little bit differently there. Some of the things in nature are different. Like, for example, they have what we would describe as waterfalls, but water flows upwards instead of down.
Okay.
Stuff like that.
So it's like a multiverse where you have a common world and you have a common these tracers as far as a common theme or power, and then you have a series, the 2 or 3, and then it moves on to a series, is a different series, maybe with different characters, but
Yes.
still within the same world and
Yes.
the same rules. Okay. Have you
Yep.
got that mapped out yet, or is that something that you're still working on?
I've got it generally mapped out. I don't have all the details down for some of the later stories that I have planned, but I like to have stuff planned as well in advance as I can. So I've got the next, I don't know, 3 or 4 books as mapped out as I can have them at the moment, but I'm always having more ideas and always changing stuff. And reception to Empire of Strings has affected my plans and ideas as well. So
Okay. Hopefully in a good way.
yes.
Generally speaking, writers are usually planners, pantsers, or some
Oh,
sort
yeah.
of a little hybrid. I'm a pantser, like poster child for pantsers. Mike is a pantser. Sounds like you're more of a planner.
I am definitely a planner. I like to have stuff planned out as far in advance as I can for the stories, and that way, because I have plans down the road, I like to have it planned out so that I can, if I want to plant something in the story I'm writing right now that will affect something down the road, that way I can do that and it works and makes sense instead of feeling shoehorned into it or put something in that I then later change because it doesn't work or something like that. I want it to all flow and fit as much as possible. If I was just doing a single book or a single series, I might not go as in depth with it, but because I have so much planned down the road, I like to have that strategy and mapped as much as I can.
So what's your target word count or page numbers?
A story with that is originally when I wrote this book, each chapter had around, I think it was like 12 to 13K words, and my publisher looked at that and we're like, we're gonna have you try and cut all of those chapters in half because at least for a first book they suggested that shorter chapters would be more accessible, and there which once I had thought about it a bit, I tend to agree with that. So now most of my chapters are anywhere between 2K and 6K words. The total word count and we did the same thing with the book as a whole. Empire of Strings was the book that's out now is about 2/3 of what was originally one book, and now that latter part is the second book that's going to be coming out because I wrote about 160K total for the book, and they said the same thing. They were like, well, we're shooting for about 80K, so we're gonna split that. And now Empire of Strings, where we were decided to split it, it's about 100K.
Well, I feel your pain because, as CJ well knows, my first attempt at writing my quote manuscript was a 1,000,000 word count, and I thought that was a normal size novel. So yeah,
That
yeah,
that makes publishers like me cringe and be like, I can't read that. You're gonna have to cut that down.
you mean a
Well,
million words isn't a regular book?
no,
I mean,
that's like a doorstop. Um,
I definitely fought that decision at first because I didn't agree with it when they wanted to split the book. I was like, no, it's a whole story. I want it to stay that way. But then we talked a lot about it, and
Mhm.
like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. I understand this now. So that's definitely a big piece of advice that I've taken going forward with writing books. Since I've gotten that advice, I'm keeping the chapters shorter and trying to keep the overall word length down as much as I can.
Well,
But
in the reader world, everything's going like to an ADD society, and so everything needs to be a little bit shorter, kind of bite pieces. Plus, when you go to do an audiobook, you're not paying like an arm and a leg to turn it into an audiobook because it is smaller.
so big, yeah, yeah, yeah.
we are working on an audiobook for Empire of Strings right now, and that's
Oh,
that, that
awesome.
that's a process. That's been a
Wow.
process, but it's
So,
fun.
so Jeffrey, do you have a writing partner, a critique group, or someone that you have that looks at your work that sort of,
Beta readers,
yeah,
any of that.
beta readers that,
So I'm going forward, but for my first book, I really didn't, which I understand now was a mistake. But um, it's yeah, I've gathered a few friends and some other people who will be helping me a lot more along those lines whenever part two of Empire of Strings comes out later this year, or when we get into the process of completing it. Um,
Mhm.
and I didn't have any beta readers for part one, and I wish that I did because they probably would have caught the grammatical errors that several reviewers have pointed out and that I myself have found going back when working on the audiobook for it.
Mhm.
um, that I wish I would have caught whenever I was finalizing it before. Yeah, that was a big learning process. I definitely have some people now who will be helping out with all of that going forward for my next book and future books as well. 'Cause that
From
was the biggest thing I learned from publishing the first one was that I didn't do several things that I probably should have.
a few tips for that is Voice Dream Reader. If you run it through Voice Dream Reader, it reads it to you and you can follow along and you can catch a lot of that stuff. Another one is getting a copy and a content editor because they do two different things.
Yes.
So that's the suggestions. You can take them or leave them. I'm that way. So your next book, what's it going to be called?
We haven't decided on the subtitle yet. It will be Empire of Strings and then a subtitle for it. We're
Okay.
in the process of deciding that right now. I have a few options I'm going through for the subtitle for it, but 'cause my publisher liked a few of them and I liked a few different ones. So I'm going to get on social media at some point and ask some of my readers what they think what they would prefer, what is a better eye catching subtitle, or because I have my ones that I know what the story is for it, and so does my publisher. But we are disagreeing on which title to use for that. So we're throwing it out there for people to see and what they think works better, and we'll have that finalized in the near future, hopefully.
Awesome. So where did you get the idea? Because that is a unique idea. I mean, it'd be great
Mhm.
to use like even in the justice system.
So the idea, I'm still trying to figure out exactly where the idea came from because I started writing chapter one of the book, and
Mhm.
I had a completely different thing in mind for it, and the idea for tracers and tracing and what they can do with projecting images all came to me as I was writing that chapter. And then I ended up scrapping the chapter that I wrote and rewriting it with this new idea. And I liked the idea. So I integrated it into the entire story and it changed the entire story
Mhm.
and narrative and ended up changing a lot of things. But I'm really happy with how it turned out. But I honestly, I don't know exactly where it came from. I was sitting there, I was writing, and inspiration just hit, and
That happens.
everything just kind of
Well,
sprung from
that
itself.
That happens.
now wait a second. That kind of sounds like a pantser, CJ.
I know. It's kind of like a little bit of a hybrid he's got going on over there.
Yeah, that's why it surprised me because that was not my plan, but
I love
I
it when
ended
the
up liking
characters
it
take
enough.
over and you just are like, okay, fine, you do it. I'll just sit here and type. Like it's fun like that. That is
Yeah,
sort of
it
a
can be.
pantherish idea going on.
Yeah.
So for what's going on for what made you want to actually publish, I guess is a good question.
I'd always wanted to, but I hadn't taken a whole lot of initiative in like putting my work out there,
Mhm.
and sending it to agents or publishers or anybody to look at. I hadn't done it very much, and my dad happened upon a Zoom webinar that Global Book Publishing was doing, and I tuned in just to see if maybe they have some advice that I can follow or whatever. I wasn't
Mhm.
expecting anything out of it, and then at the end they had it was like it was like a type of thing of like fill this out, and if we when we might get back to you with like additional tips or information or whatever, fill out this form that they had, and then went and I did and got it in the time frame they wanted to, and they got back to me and we talked, and they offered me a program with them, and I wasn't expecting it at all,
Mhm.
and I was um, blown away by that, and that's just kind of how it happened. I knew it was something I wanted to do at some point in my life. I hadn't necessarily planned on it at the time that it happened, but I'm
Mm.
very excited and grateful that it did. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, I mean, I wish I had like a more like inspirational story with that, but it's like, no, I just kind of
Oh,
happened upon it.
No, I
so
mean that's
what do you do in the real world?
I do some warehouse work. Out here. I've gone through a couple different warehouse jobs in the area around here, and I enjoy that type of work because it kind of allows me to, at least in the back of my mind, be thinking about
Mhm.
like stories and writing and other
oh
stuff
yeah,
in there
yeah.
while doing physical work in front of me. But that's I got really lucky with one of my previous jobs that we were allowed to like have headphones or AirPods in whatever, so I could listen to audiobooks or podcasts or music or whatever while I was working, and that helped a lot with inspiration and figuring out a lot of story stuff while doing work that was making me money.
Mhm.
So Jeffrey, as a new author, you just had a book published, and you've already mentioned a couple of things, but what advice would you give to any aspiring authors like in the situation that you were before? What advice would you give them in terms of what you would definitely do and what you definitely would not do?
Mhm.
um, what I would definitely do is take some initiative. It's like I got with sending out your stuff. It can be I know it can be frightening to send out your stuff to publishers and agents because they will critique and they will come back and you might not like what they have to say, but take some initiative
Mhm.
because I got lucky. That doesn't mean that that's going to happen for everyone. I'm well aware that I got very lucky, and I wish that even though it worked out for me, I wish that I had more initiative in sending out my stuff prior to that. So just don't be afraid to take chances, send your stuff out. You're probably not gonna get anywhere if you don't try.
Mhm.
And with fantasy in particular, the other advice I would have for that too is that when you're writing your first draft or your manuscript or whatever, especially in the first draft of it, don't be afraid to do exactly what you want to do with that
Mhm.
story. Put it all down, put it all out there. If you want to change things, you can change things later. But in that first draft, just do exactly what you want to do with it, no matter what. Don't set any rules. Don't follow guidelines. People say, "Oh, you can do this, but you can't do that," or whatever. It's fantasy. Do whatever you want, and then if you don't like how that turns out, that's what second and third drafts are for.
Mhm.
uh,
Yeah.
it's like that would be my advice for someone who's when you're writing your first draft, like just do it. Just
Okay.
put it down, and then don't worry about what anyone's going to think about it at that point in time. Just uh, just get it down, and then you can always change things later.
Perfect.
Um,
How can people find you online?
they can. My primary place that you can find me is on my author Facebook page, author Jeffrey Lee. That's the place where I'm most active. I have my Twitter and Instagram. I'm on there as well. I haven't been very active on there, but Twitter is at Jeff Lee author, I believe, and Instagram underscore author Jeffrey Lee, I believe is what it is. Like I'm not very active on those two, but Facebook, I'm always on there all day, every day. I can be found. That's the best place to get in touch with me, 100%.
Okay. And your books are found on Amazon. Your Amazon author page has been scrolling
Yes.
across the bottom this whole time. So you can find them there. So when are you targeting to launch your second book in the series?
We don't have an exact date, but we're hoping to put it out sometime this summer.
Okay,
We're
awesome.
working on the draft. The draft is done. It's being edited right now. We're working on the title and cover at the moment. So it's in the works. It's in the process, and I'm excited to get it out there.
Sweet.
So I have a question about covers, Jeffrey. Do you have does your publishing company pick the cover artist for you, or the cover, or is that something you have any input in?
So they have a team of artists that work on covers. They essentially what they did, they asked me if I had a particular vision for the cover, and um, which I didn't like have a direct one. I had like a vague idea for it, and I sent them some details on that, and like kind of like what the magic could look like, the tracer magic that they use could look like, and what the main character looks like because she's featured on the cover.
Mhm.
And I sent them that, not a whole lot of information, just description of her, description of the magic, and they came back with the artwork that became what the cover is. But to answer your question, they like I definitely had input in it. Like they asked me first, like, what do you want to see with the cover, and we'll see if we can make that happen. And the way I understood it is, if that wasn't something that could happen, then we would have discussions of, well, here they would say, like, oh, maybe here's another idea or something along those lines. But like I had some input on it, and it got sent to their art team, and they came back with what became the cover of the book. Now that was essentially the first version. There wasn't multiple versions of it. That's more or less what it was.
Awesome. Well, one quick question. Oh, I just lost it. If you have one gold nugget that you can give to somebody who wants to write a fantasy book, what would it be?
It would probably be similar to what I said a minute ago. Just it's fantasy. Go for it. Like just no matter how crazy it is, no matter what you want to do with your story, just do it. You can always change things before it's published if you go down that route. And I would say that fantasy is it's the type of genre where like there are no limitations with fantasy. Don't tell yourself that there are, because then you're just creating those limitations for yourself. Unless you want to. There's nothing wrong with that either. But with fantasy, I think the most important thing you can do is just let your imagination run wild. There's no wrong with fantasy. There's no right with fantasy. It's just it's fantasy.
Mhm.
It's whatever comes from your brain, from your imagination that you've created with this. And just
Awesome.
don't be afraid to do whatever you want to do with it.
Perfect. Well, thank you, sir. We appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for
I
having me.
did show up the Empire of Strings a few minutes ago on YouTube. So if you're listening to it, make sure to jump over to YouTube or go to Amazon. Just type in author Jeffrey Lee, and you can find Empire of Strings right there, and you go ahead and order his book. For those who are running fantasy, as he says, anything goes. Go for it. Have fun with it. Enjoy.
Absolutely.
Let your soul go free, so to speak, when you're writing, and see what
Yeah.
happens. You might surprise yourself. So in the meantime, next week, we're going to be at the same place, same station you found us today, whether it's audio or video. And we're going to be doing part 2 of audiobooks. We did part 1 of audiobooks last week, and we're going to be doing part 2 next week, which Mike will take us through the rest of the process and see, what else you can learn. So make sure to tune in. If you haven't seen part 1, make sure to go back and watch it or listen to it. And then part 2 will be next week at 1 o'clock. In the meantime, guys, have a great week, and we will catch you next week. Bye.